So I had this experience recently where I had to stop a relationship. Well, I've had lots of experiences like that recently, but yeah, I'd known this person for like 30 years, and we had to end. It was just became way too painful for me to like continue the relationship, and it was really weird because I hadn't spoken to them for like a long period of time. So there was a gap of about a year, and then I got in touch and had this experience of like talking to them, and it's like they were like a different person, like they'd changed like quite significantly. It was really weird. It was a super weird experience because I've known this person like since I was like 11 or something, right? And they've been fairly consistent in a lot of ways throughout the relationship, but yeah, all of a sudden, like a year had passed and we spoke, and it was like talking to a different person, and they even had a different accent. Like it was trippy. It was like they'd turned into like a 16th century Irish peasant. So like, what the hell?
I was going to say it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but
Yeah.
people's accents don't change in that, do they?
Oh,
They
no.
look and sound the same, but their soul has sort of
Yeah.
altered or gone.
Great movie. Yeah, it's weird, and they sort of like turned into a religious Christian, and like they were like literally a really open person their whole life, and then all of a sudden they turned to Christianity. Like, I mean, they said that they had a breakdown, and then they started reading the Bible, whatever. And that happened to me like a couple of years ago with a really close friend who was also open-minded person. We used to talk about for hours and hours into the night about the possibilities of the universe and science and spirituality and energy, and like have all these incredible conversations. And then like he turned and had some kind of breakdown, and then he became really serious Christian, and he changed as well, and that's really tough. Really tough. And both of them went through this like big conspiracy theory thing of like getting really, really into like yeah, just like really out there conspiracy, like flat Earth and like
Anti-vax.
anti-vax, but really, really intense. I mean, believe what I'm not saying don't have your own beliefs and your own opinions. Like, I celebrate that, and I'm not saying I know and other people don't or anything like that. No, I'm really open-minded, and I think I tend to attract really open-minded people in my life who are curious. But something happened to them where, and this, and these are two of my closest relationships, where they stopped being curious, and they were just like, no, it's like this. And then there's nothing more to say. No.
They've stopped listening.
Yeah. So we can't talk anymore about anything because it's like they're done. They're done. No, it's like this. Nothing more to say. It's like, how can you relate to someone who, I mean, unless you're like that, then okay, then you can relate. But for me, it's all about curiosity, openness, and honesty, and like I've got nowhere to go. It's freaky, super freaky, and super painful. It's been really difficult, and I mean, like this one that I was just talking about initially only happened to me like weeks ago. So yeah, it was shocking. Like I came off the call and I was shaking, like my whole body was physically shaking for about an hour because I was in shock. I was in total shock. I couldn't believe it. It was really freaky, really weird, really scary. And I was so angry. I was so angry about it. Oh, it was tough. But yeah, like you're reading a really good book about
Yeah.
transformation.
I'm just coming to the end of Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. And she talks about that exact thing of someone who used to be very sort of open-minded, and open to ideas and listening and talking and debating, then going through some kind of breakdown or extremely traumatic thing, and then coming out the other side a different person. Like, they look and sound the same, but they're sort of altered, and the open-minded beliefs that they once had are kind of flipped. I mean, she calls it the mirror world. It's like this place where, the discourses have been kind of flipped on their head. And I mean, she talks about it a lot in a sort of political sense, and conspiracy theories and all of that come into it. And yeah, it's just like how people are dealing with the intense fear and anxiety that is in the air, and also their own sort of personal traumas, is by moving to this dark side of more fear, and more defensiveness, and more not listening, more division, more, us versus them, they're to blame, that kind of thing, and sort of looking out for yourself. And this is what I believe, and this is my story that I believe now, and I'm firmly rooted in that, and kind of every man for himself sort of situation that a lot of people are in the world right now, as a way of coping with all of the worry and anxiety in the air. And she talks about the pandemic a lot, and how that sort of amplified all of this. Really great book, really, really fascinating book. I feel like I've learned a lot from it.
Yeah, sounds it.
About transformation, which is kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's freaky, man. It's real super freaky stuff.
So what do you do with that then? These relationships that have kind of flipped around like this, how do you process it?
How do I process it? What do you mean?
Well, it's happened to you twice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you...
Probably more than that,
How do you make sense of it?
How do I make sense of it? That's a good question. It happened a few years ago as well, with like someone who claimed to be my friend. In fact, it's a reoccurring theme, actually. 'Cause I had a conversation with someone who called me up the other day, who I haven't spoken to in years, actually, and he was a friend when I lived in Brighton, and he'd done mushrooms that night, and he'd stayed up all night, and he'd had like this really kind of like intense experience where he like went inside his mind, and he saw his subconscious, and he saw like other parts of himself. And he called me up at like 7 a.m, and we chatted for an hour. And it reminded me, actually, because when we were hanging out in Brighton, I used to hang out with this group of people who, or when I first moved there, in a house, and we all used to like I thought we were friends. Oh man, this is like a reoccurring thing for me in my childhood as well, because when I was a child, I was told this narrative about how I was in my family, and then I had the rug pulled under me in that as well. But this example that I give in Brighton was that like everyone treated me like I was a part of this group, and I was friends with them, and I thought I was friends with them. And then I started dating the sister of the guy who I was living with, and he hated it. And he like turned against me, and he got everyone in that group to turn against me, basically. And they're all like super nasty. But anyway, my friend who called me up was supportive in that moment. He was part of that group, and he came to me and he was supportive. And I had this realization that he was my friend. It was really difficult to deal with, but it was also really beautiful, because on the one hand, I felt really betrayed by everyone, because they sort of pretended that they liked me. Right, and the truth came out when I started seeing this person, because the alpha of that side of the group hated it. So everyone sort of took sides, and everyone was on that person's side. But someone was a kind of mediator between the groups, and he came, and I was like, wow, that's really beautiful because he loves me and
It's
I love
interesting
him.
how conflict can do that. You know, you ruffle people's feathers and then the truth comes out. But
Yeah.
you'll sort of live in this little bubble of like, oh, we're all friends and let's go out for dinner and talk about our lives sort of thing. But it's just not what's actually going on.
Yeah, I know, and you like that's been difficult for me. And then like a few years ago, I had this, comma. I always say brackets, and it's not right because of my dyslexia. But you're like, no, don't say brackets. 'Cause
People
it's not right.
say quote
Quote
unquote.
unquote friends, and and another group of people who were quote unquote friends, right? And like who would like get in touch with me, see how I was doing, talk to me about my music, and this guy just ghosted me for like a year, and we were hanging out quite a lot before that, and like I was going through what I was going through at the time. I'm always going through something, but like, and I thought we were friends, and then he just stopped talking to me, and he never talked to me again. And like, I tried to get in touch with him, and he just would avoid, ghost all my calls, ghost all my emails, and I had to just end the relationship. He was such a coward, man, to not like be honest with me, and it made me realize that he'd never been honest with me. That's the thing. He'd never been honest with me. He's probably not honest with himself, and he's probably not honest to the people around him, and the people around him aren't honest to him. And then all these people who were like coming to me and pretending to be my friend just stopped as well once they'd found out that I was no longer friends with them. And then when I was a kid, all my family lied to me about my dad who was in prison. No one told me. I had another sister. No one told me. And then he just showed up when I was 12 and told me they'd been in prison. I got another sister, and like everyone in my family knew, and they'd all been keeping it from me. That was major experience of like, fuck, everything I thought I knew about people is wrong, and I can't trust anyone. That was devastating. Devastating. And it's funny because I have this thing come up again and again and again. Like, it's just a pattern. So how do I deal with it? What do I do with it? I accept it now for the truth. And how it's useful for me now is that when I meet someone for the first time, I have ways of communicating and interacting with that person that will upset them, essentially. Because when people are upset, they can't lie, right? They can't lie because it's like we're all like in control of our ego, and we're all controlling the way that we put ourselves out to other people, right? And how we want to be, observed, and how we want to come across. But when you're upset, you can't do it because it's like you just, your emotion takes over, and the truth comes out. So what I do now is I will push on purpose, and I'll see what that person's made of. But like you say, ruffle their feathers, see what they're made of early on. And if it's nasty, I won't continue having a relationship with them. So I'm like really super picky now about who I have in my life. Really picky, and I'll test it as well straight away. And if I sense any resentment there, any nastiness, because the thing is, the people that attack you pretend to be your friends, but and they're the most dangerous ones because they can put you down, and they can do it really super subtly, and they can really mess you up, and you don't even realize they're doing it.
Well, another way to kind of, get a sense of what people really think is listening to what people make jokes about. I think that's another way that the truth can be communicated. It's like, because I used to, when I was younger, I was in a group of friends who were always sort of like mocking me, in a sort of jokey way, and making fun of like the person that I was going out with, or like making fun of me. And it's just sort of, you can see what they really think, but they do it in a jokey way. So you just sort of accept it in the moment and laugh along with it and think that it's all fine. But yeah, I think that's another.
Yeah, that's great. That is true. Yeah, because my brother and sister are really nasty, and like they do things like that. They say, "Oh, I don't really mean this, but I fucking hate you." Or because it's like they won't even take responsibility enough to actually say what they really think. They hide behind jokes, and they hide behind saying, "Oh yeah, it's all fun," and like, oh. And it's like, you haven't even got the bottle to actually say what you really think. Yeah, you're a coward. So yeah, I can really relate to that. And those passive aggressive communications and those like taking it back first and then saying something really nasty was so damaging to me in being around those people. And again, I don't talk to them. I don't talk to my brother and sister, and I probably never will again because they're just really super bullies. And so, you know, transformation is interesting because it's almost like people are being revealed sometimes. You know, it's like the transformation is an inner transformation in terms of how you perceive others, right? And then that's the inner transformation. It's like almost like how we see other people is how we see ourselves. It's like that feedback loop. Okay, this person isn't who I thought they were, and I need to change to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a good way to reframe it, because it's easy to just get angry and judgmental, isn't it, about other people, especially when they hurt us. So it's good to take that in and maybe think about, okay, well, what boundaries do I need to set here, or how can I protect myself? How can I look out for myself? Yeah, and I think with regards to art, it's a similar thing. You know, what you're describing with your siblings is their sort of shadow selves coming out. You know, the darker parts of themselves that they maybe haven't dealt with, and it's so true of art. I think you know, when you create a piece of art, it's difficult to hide in that. I mean, it is possible, but you do see parts of the artist coming out that they maybe aren't conscious of, in the way that they write characters, for example, if it's a story that you're reading, the way that they portray different kinds of people.
Yeah, like Zombie GG. Oh, we've been watching like Gilmore Girls, which we watch, but we've watched the season that we don't normally watch because
Season
it's really
7.
terrible car crash season. But there are some good bits, like, and we have been sort of weirdly addicted to like looking at like the death of, you know, like the morbid sort of like amusement of things being terrible. But there's this story where like Rory goes out with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's like Logan, who's this like multi-millionaire, you know, kind of son of a billionaire, and they go out and they do some networking. It's a networking party, and she meets someone who runs like an online journal, really big one, and he says, "Oh, I'm looking for writers." She's a writer. You know, I'd love you to do an article on tonight. And then she goes off, spends all night drinking coffee writing the article, shows it to Logan the next day, and Logan gets really upset, and he's like, "I can't believe this is how you see me." Because she just really rips it out of every person there, and like but she's totally unaware, right? Because she thinks she's just being comical, but because she hasn't integrated her shadow.
She's a massive people pleaser,
Yeah.
and on the surface, you know, is really kind and generous and loving of everyone. But then when she writes this piece about this party, she's just like totally kind of judgmental and yeah, like shamey, and talking about
Classist.
very, very classist, you know, and it's a good representation of that, I think.
It is a good representation of that, yeah. Because it's like, you know, we have to like embrace the fact that we are both the persecutor and the one being persecuted in life, you know. Like we're the full spectrum of like the human experience, like all internally. Like we're all like universes walking around. That's the way I see it. And
Yeah, she talks about that in Doppelganger, actually, the victim and the victimizer. And yeah, like she's Jewish, and she talks a lot about, you know, the plight of Jewish people, and how the Holocaust, you know, I mean, I don't want to get into too deep a discussion about something that, you know, is very complex, but just how the victimization of Jewish people then led to what it's led to, you know, with Israel and everything, and them becoming the victimizers in this very complicated situation. So yeah, it's, I think, accepting all the parts of yourself, or at least trying to see all the parts of yourself is, you know, something to strive for.
yeah, and again, it's like when we get when we're in the family, right? The family's just got so much to answer for, the family system. We get rewarded for certain types of behaviour, and we get sort of, potentially the threat of being ostracised for certain types of behaviour, right? So it's like, when your parents say, "Oh, you're such a good girl," it's like it's kind of like controlling the child, right? Because it's like they, by saying, "Oh, you're such a good girl," is like it is rewarding the fact that they are being obedient to the parents, and what the child can do is that they can internalize it as their identity. So I think like one thing that I learned from and I learned a lot from the Healing the Shame That Bonds Us, John Bradshaw.
Healing the shame that binds you.
Thank you. Yeah, is that, when you're talking to a child, you should just refer to their behavior, not them as an individual, because that way there's like distance between the things that they do and the person that they are. But this gets intertwined in the language. Language is such a powerful thing. So when I would get shamed, for example, for being angry, and my mum would say things like, "Oh, that's not you, David," or like, "This, who is this person?" It's like it kind of like what it does is it like separates your psyche, that kind of language, when you're a kid, because like you trust your parents to be able to see you for who you are, because they're the only people in your life really that you can trust. And
Or you think you can trust.
you think you can trust. You have to think you can trust them, because the world would just be a way too scary place to not have anyone who you can trust, because you're just so vulnerable. Like, you can't live your own life yet. So you kind of have to trust in, and obviously that can be very damaging. So it really twists your perception of yourself. And I think this is true in the world, is like people think that they're one thing because that's been reinforced in their childhood. And and it happens in friendship groups, like you've talked about, Jade, a number of times with the people that you used to spend time with. They would reinforce, like they even have nicknames for you, right? Like Jo and stuff. Like they almost like creating a character for you that suits them. It's another kind of like way of like controlling people for unmet needs by the person. So like they invent this person, like people who call me Dave. It's like Dave is just a fucking made up like person who doesn't exist, and people project it. It's like, I hate being called Dave. I fucking hate it. It's not my name.
It's interesting with nicknames how that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Strange.
It is strange.
It's like you're taking away someone's identity and sticking onto them, like you say, whatever you're projecting.
Exactly. So it's really easy to like believe that stuff. And then what happens is that like all of the parts, because you are an extremely complex being, you push a lot of things down because you don't, they're not convenient for other people, for example. You push them down as subconscious, and then they come out. They're uncontrolled. They come out as projections, as like So, this is one of the reasons we do art. It's that we're confronting ourselves. We're going in and we're looking at ourselves, and we're integrating parts of ourselves, and that's a scary thing to do, because it's like to admit that you have it in you to kill children. Not everyone is like comfortable with that as a concept, right? But we all have that. We are all that. We are the people who are responsible for genocide, and we are the oppressed people who it's happening to, and we are the people not doing anything, and we are the people doing something. It's like we're not one of those things. We are all of those things, and the power in the knowing that is that we get to integrate these things, and we get to be able to use them in a way where we can direct how they are being expressed. If we deny them, we are not in control of them, and that's the world. We live in a world full of projection, where people are projecting things on other people. They are the problem, and that's
it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah, hate, blame, judge.
Well, I think like, and as artists as well, that process of like confronting yourself, confronting those dark parts, it helps other people to then maybe recognize those parts in themselves, like when they engage with your work.
Right.
That's really the powerful thing about art. I've just read Ingmar Bergman's memoir, The Magic Lantern.
Great book.
I can see it in my line of vision right now, and I've just thought about it from what you were just saying. And it's interesting because, I started reading it. I was really impressed by how forthright he was being about his own darkness. He talks about how, he grew up while the Second World War was happening, and in the place, he like went to Germany on like an exchange program with another student, and they went to one of Hitler's speeches, and then they stood there in the front row, and he was fully captured by Hitler's presence, and his family were sort of like Nazi sympathizers, and I was just impressed that he like admitted that in the pages of this memoir, and wrote about this part of his life with a real frankness, and he did that with other things as well. Like he talks about when he was a little boy, like trying to kill his baby sister, as another like very vivid memory that he describes. But then at the same time, there's a lot that he doesn't talk about, and you get a sense of how fractured his intimate relationships were. His relationships with women, and it seems to me that maybe he had some problems with addiction to sex and intimate relationships, and he talks about having like multiple families that he was supporting because he was just like getting women pregnant all the time. And it's just interesting that like he just glances over these things like really quickly. He writes those other scenes in a lot of detail, rich detail, and then with his relationships, it's like he sort of feels like he's avoiding that subject for the whole memoir. So I just found that really interesting. It's like he's obviously dealt with and integrated those parts of him that are trying to kill his sister and being a Nazi sympathizer, but then these other parts with his relationships, he just doesn't want to deal with them. And I mean, that's up to him, obviously, but I just found it really interesting seeing like what was rendered in detail and what was just glanced over in the book. I mean, I love memoir so much. It's probably my favorite genre because you can really get a sense of a person by like how they tell their story, of themselves, of their life, how they frame it. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to reread it because I haven't read that since I was a teenager, so I'd probably get a lot more of the nuanced stuff now as an adult reading it. But yeah, I mean, wow, like Autumn Sonata was just like had me bawling in tears. I mean, if that film affected me so much for days and years probably to come, like it's definitely one of the most powerful films that I have ever seen and probably ever will see if you get a chance to see it. I mean, it might not be for you, right? Because it's like it is really, really raw, and it's about families and trauma. And like, if you're not in the right place in your life, you just ain't gonna sit and watch that. But if you're in the right place in your life and you are looking for some deep honesty on some other level of honesty, then I like, wow, what an incredible piece of art that is. Like just absolutely incredible piece.
We'd really love it if you could help us to grow the podcast and grow the community. So if there's anyone you have in your life who you think might enjoy Pivotal Slice, please do recommend. It goes a long way.
It does, and you can subscribe to our Patreon for as little as £3. You can also pay a bit more and get exclusive episodes and juicy content.
Or if you fancy buying us a coffee, that would help us a lot to keep growing and give us a little energy boost.
You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, Audible. You can rate us on Spotify, and you can engage us on YouTube by liking, commenting, and subscribing. This will go a long way in moving through the algorithm universe. And I think, like, another thing coming back to like the expression of art that is interesting is that like there is like an externalization process that happens on the page, if you're writing, where you're distancing yourself from yourself. and you can almost be more able to find things in yourself in the unconscious through the process of writing. It's like just a very specific kind of way of like uncovering the self from the subconscious writing. Because like if you think about it, like language, writing, music, it's these are all like unconscious processes, and I think like you can really bring things out of the depths through the process. And the relationship anyway in Autumn Sonata between the daughter and the mother, played by the actor's names.
It's Ingrid Bergman is the mother and Liv Ullmann is the daughter.
Liv Ullmann's performance is like one of the most powerful performances I've ever seen, and she just is so deep because like Ingrid Bergman, it's like he's like cast these people because it's real. Like it's not just a story on a page. It's like when they're acting, they're not acting. They're like, and they are acting, but I think really amazing acting is like that. It's real. It's real. Like they are accessing parts of themselves in those roles that are who they are. And reading about it, Ingrid Bergman had real problems with doing the film because again she abandoned her children. She was a Hollywood star,
but she was at that time very much avoiding facing the fact that she'd abandoned her children and her own daughter in particular, who she did actually abandon. But when she got to the set of Autumn Sonata, she was like really belligerent and argumentative and like questioning everything that Ingmar Bergman was sort of asking of her, because she was just not really ready to face that or kind of surrender control to that process. And that really comes through in the performance, her sort of trying to hold on to control and like hold on to this story she's telling herself about her being there for her child when she wasn't. And it's fascinating.
And same with fucking Ingmar Bergman. He wasn't there for his children.
Yeah.
He abandoned his children. He abandoned his partners. He abandoned himself. His parents abandoned him. Their parents abandoned him. Them. And on and on and on and on and on. So it's like, it's crazy. Like to be that raw. I mean, there's a scene like between the mother and daughter, and there's another daughter in another room, locked up in another room, who's like obviously like highly autistic, disabled, and in complete physical and mental agony. And she's just sort of in the background. And there's a scene between the mother and daughter where the mother's like, "Do you blame me for the the pain and suffering of her other daughter?" And she's like, "Yes, I do blame you. You are responsible." It's just, you just don't get that, do you? Like, I've never seen any, like how raw that is. I mean, obviously I'm just describing a scene and it doesn't come through in me describing it, but it's just an incredibly powerful moment of like, Ingmar's writing on the page that. But it's like it's really, he's revealing himself, but he's doing it in a way that is externalized and then created through an art form, and he's probably unaware. I mean, he is such an aware person, but he's also such an unaware. It's such a contradiction. Well,
and that's honest too, isn't it? Because we're all contradictions, full of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I write, it's like I don't know what it is that I'm doing, and it's really fascinating because at the moment I'm writing a lot of new pieces, and I'm really searching for those deep, raw places inside of myself to do it. But it's unconscious. So like, the more I work on these pieces, the more they reveal themselves to me. It's like myself being revealed to myself. It's a really fascinating process. It's like, I'm just accessing something and it's coming out, and it's like as I'm doing it, I can't even see it. because it's like I'm so close to it, and like the more distance, the meaning changes, or
You
like
just kind of have to let go, don't you, of trying to see it, and just accept that you don't know. You don't know what's going to come out. You don't really know yourself, and just sort of, it's just completely surrendering
yeah,
to
and
that.
trusting it to be what it needs to be, and yeah, because I don't have any control, none, zero, and it's kind of a contradiction in the process because one of the reasons that we all get into doing this stuff, making music, writing, art, whatever, creative, making things, is like control, control, control. I remember my dad fucking driving me around one of the few times I ever spent time with him. And we were in the Cotswolds. I think I swam 3 times when I was for like 15 years or something. And one of the times I went to the Cotswolds, and he took me out in his car, and he drove really fast and down the country lanes, and his girlfriend was in the back, like fucking freaking out. She was so scared, and he was just like control, 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 and he was just driving really, really quickly. It's just control, control, control. It was a really vivid memory of him.
Yeah,
And
very symbolic.
yeah, I was like 8 years old. I didn't know what it meant, but like even control is a contradiction, right? Because it's like, and I think with the creative process, it's like, yeah, I can control, 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 make decisions, control discipline to practicing the instruments every day, control my discipline in meditating, control my discipline in reading and absorbing material and learning about the process, about the craft. But then when I sit down to do it, it's like that all goes, and it just this thing takes over where I'm completely oblivious. Like I have no control, zero control. So it's like,
So creating a controlled container in which to then give up control.
yeah, it's a good way of putting it. It's a good way of putting it. So, a controlled container for giving up control. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. Very interesting stuff to talk about. And I guess the transformation is that we transform through the process, of life. And the process of art is the process of life. I can't really make the things that I'm making without living. The living is the thing that goes in there. And then the form is just like the craft. Practicing something over and over and over and over and over every day, day in, day out.
I think that's why I've got so into memoir, because it's just life. This is just someone's life and their reflections on it, rather than, I find that fiction a lot of the time can be more escapist, although the truth is still revealed through fiction. But I do think, I don't know, a lot of storytellers are like going to fiction as a kind of way to escape themselves and create an entirely separate world from themselves. That's certainly why I was doing it when I got back into writing. I was, writing science fiction and just using my imagination to like basically build a whole island for myself to go and live on, to get away from myself and my life and where I was at in my life at that time. And as I've grown through the writing, I've just got closer and closer sort of back to myself. And same with what I'm reading. It's just I'm now only really reading memoir and non-fiction. Occasionally I'll read a novel, but it's always a relief to me to come back to non-fiction and memoir, because it's just like, oh, this is just real, and it's kind of refreshing that I'm just reading about someone's life, and that's more interesting to me, I guess, than a story, although it is still a story, obviously.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And like where the fiction overlaps with the non-fiction and vice versa.
Yeah, because in some senses, and I totally get what you're saying, and also the opposite can be true as well, right? Because it's like the Stanislaw Lem books, which Stanislav Lem, and he wrote Solaris and like just some other, The Invincible, amazing book. But I think the theme that always came through in his writing and his stories, because it's science fiction, it's like escapist science fiction, is that the further that you move away in the universe, the closer you get to inside of your own being. It's like Solaris is like this planet that they go to, and that's like in the distant like star system, and they find this planet, and they orbit around this planet, and they start having all of these weird experiences, these hallucinations from their past. So it's like, something that's interesting, I think, about doing escapist stuff and like things to like invent a new world and get away, is it's like the further you move in doing your memoir, the more you connect with yourself internally, and also paradoxically, the farther you go away, you come back. It's like you can never escape the internal who you are. It is everything. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is like external versus internal. What is that? Like, I don't think we really know what that is when we talk about something outside of ourselves. In some senses, there is nothing outside of ourselves, but then there is. So what is that? Because I mean, if you break it down, it's like we're all in this unified field, right? So everything is one vibrating. The quantum science is like everything is one vibrating, massive explosion of energy, right? So it's like everything is one thing. So is the dream external? Like when I dream at night, is that external? It's in my mind. So when I'm awake is a dream. So it's all internal. I don't know. I guess this is just a side note, some area of like thought process that I'm having in my life right now.
Well, it's different stories lighting up different parts of ourselves. Like when we watch a comfort movie, it's a part of us, although it's an escapist thing. We're getting lost in a story. I think it is still resonating with a part of us inside. So, yeah, I like what you're saying there about the further away you get, the closer you get kind of to yourself.
Yeah.
Those different parts.
I think that's right. It's like, people who go to India to find themselves. It's like, or, like people who are like constantly having one relationship, another relationship, another relationship, to try and find a person who's going to heal them or, make their lives complete. It's like the problem is that like they're never resolving themselves, and they just go from one relationship to another, and it's like, what's the common denominator here? Like Mr. Peanut Butter. It's like, oh, I wonder why all of these like powerful, beautiful women just end up getting like really resentful of me. I've been through like 10 relationships like this. What's the common denominator? It's like, especially in an intimate relationship, you're being completely confronted by yourself. It's you. It's like I see you, but I see me. It's me being reflected back at me through you. Same with making art. So you just see yourself, right? Because it is you. So I think it's an interesting paradox.